Now, let's return to the story because there are several more accounts of Atlantis that we have to consider. One is the original story we first shared in the Hidden Human History movie regarding the Martians and the fall of consciousness. Then we have another version that comes from the Book of Enoch, an ancient text that accounts for some specific events that took place before the flood as well. We also see the Emerald Tablets and what is written there about the fall of Atlantis. Because we've already made a movie about the Atlantis Martian story, we'll just cover it briefly here. And for the sake of the story and the visualization of it, for now we're just going to show Atlantis as we have so far, as a continent of its own. But keep in mind that this is kind of a placeholder, as Atlantis is a great mystery. Even the name Atlantis comes from later writings about this land. And if we were to go back in time and discover that it was real, it most likely was not called Atlantis in their own language. Who knows? Did the continent really sink? Was it Antarctica? Maybe instead of sinking, it flooded over and then froze underneath miles of ice. Or did it simply never exist at all? Well, if it did, here's a breakdown of one of the more popular stories about the legends of Atlantis. Essentially, the Atlanteans were more mature and evolved since their time on Mu, and were very connected with each other and nature. But things changed dramatically for the Atlanteans when a different species from another world came to our planet. The story suggests that they were beings from Mars, who were said to be responsible for destroying the atmosphere on the planet, causing it to become the red, lifeless rock that we know it to be today. These beings had taken a path of separation in the evolution of their species, a path called the Lucifer experiment, which involves disconnecting themselves from each other and nature and having no inner love or compassion whatsoever. The story says that these Martians made a home for themselves on Atlantis and slowly began to affect the consciousness of the Atlanteans by introducing their technologies and affecting the way that the Atlanteans perceived reality. As a result, the Atlanteans began to become more disconnected from nature and each other, which allowed the Martians to easily take over. Eventually, a comet was said to have hit the planet right in the area where the Martians' home was on Atlantis. The Martians were furious, and so they built a technology called a synthetic Merkaba, and they were going to use it to get revenge. This technology, however, did not work properly and emitted a shockwave of energy on their home and ultimately created a dimensional tear. This caused a tremendous catastrophe for all of the life on Atlantis, and the beings living there became very sick, with consciousness and energy from other dimensions being pulled into their world. The result of this was a huge fall in consciousness, which coincided with a global pole shift, a geomagnetic reversal. A massive shift took place. Save for a few spiritual masters, all of humanity fell to a lower state of consciousness, as low as you can go and still survive. In the process of this, their memories were erased, just as a magnet can wipe the information on a hard drive. Now, this may seem far-fetched, but it isn't impossible. One particular study provides good evidence that humans can perceive the magnetic field around them even as weak as the Earth's itself. A follow-up study found that the mechanism behind this are magnetized particles in the brain. Researchers concluded that for such an ability to exist, it must have had some evolutionary purpose. Interestingly, some studies have even indicated that two major geomagnetic shifts may have had an impact, not only on our evolution in the past, but also had a role in extinction events ranging from the early Quaternary period to the early Holocene. This study found that a large global geomagnetic reversal event called the Lechamp event 44,000 years ago and another unnamed event 13,000 years ago both coincided with mammal extinctions, which were impacted by a weakening of the Earth's magnetic field leading to higher ultraviolet radiation. This may not only coincide with the sinking of Atlantis, but also the theorized timeline of the sinking of Mu. Further, by comparing branches in the human family tree and linking them with the magnetic field information found in sediments and archaeomagnetic data, they found that there was possibly a long-term role for ultraviolet radiation and the magnetic field in human evolution. That said, the concept of memory erasure could have various meanings. In one sense, it could be a global magnetic effect wiping human memories, but it could also relate to the destruction of all of our technology and most of civilization, and being reduced to a level of consciousness where we had to start over technologically from scratch, with no records and very little evidence of any ancient civilization. This entire story is said to have happened 13,000 years ago, at the point when Earth went through a huge shift pertaining to its polar ice caps, when a massive amount of ice sheets began to melt, flooding the world with water and potentially helping to usher in the Holocene, the epoch of time we are in today after the end of the last ice age. After this shift, small pockets of humans slowly began to develop and discover life all over again from square one. And the few spiritual masters who kept their memories began to support us as we became capable of comprehending their stories. They may have tried to explain the history of the world, but the fallen humans couldn't comprehend it. And so the stories were masked in the legends of the gods so that humanity could come to make sense of who they were and where they came from. These quote unquote gods seeded civilizations around the world, from ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt to India and all the way to the Olmecs in Mesoamerica. Of course, it may be more logical to presume that it was Enki or the other Anunnaki who helped seed civilization once more, at least in ancient Sumer, or perhaps a combination of the two. Ultimately, this is the point at which a lot of this entire story would have been passed down to the Sumerians. Earlier on, we explored the possibility that the stories of the gods were an encoded message handed down to the Sumerians and Babylonians by these beings who had a much higher understanding than the early humans did. If this story is true, then this is how the Sumerians would have come to have knowledge of the origins of the solar system from previous higher beings who shared it with them. But is it truly possible that this is how it all happened? Now, in this story, it was said that the goal for us as a species was to return to our original higher consciousness in as short of a time as possible. And the time that was forecasted for us to finally begin remembering who we are and what our place in the cosmos is this point in time right now, which is why this conversation is more important than ever. For it would seem as though we are at a huge turning point for our species and actively shifting into a higher consciousness more and more each day. Interestingly, this shift in energy is currently being mirrored by the Schumann resonance in our Earth's magnetic fields. The electromagnetic resonance being generated by lightning discharge in a part of the upper atmosphere known as the ionosphere has been increasing recently to coincide with our frequency shift. This means that our magnetic field is actually changing to coincide with our evolution, which I find just to be amazing. This is a very exciting time in our evolution, as with research teams like the Global Coherence Initiative and HeartMath, some very interesting research is being done on the interconnection between humanity and Earth's magnetic fields and energetic systems, giving us insights into our own frequency changes as and when they happen. Anyway, back to Atlantis. As I was saying, there's a few other versions of how the story could have transpired. We're going to now briefly look at these other two accounts of Atlantis from ancient times. First, let us begin with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. These are said to be 12 ancient tablets which are under the care of a secret society in Egypt who have vowed to protect the sacred wisdom inscribed upon them. The tablets are said to have been written by Thoth, who presided on Atlantis before the fall and whose Atlantean name was Chiketet Arlik Vomalites. The tablets were supposedly translated by a man named Dr. Doriel. Of course, these tablets are believed by many to be a hoax, for no modern picture of them actually exists, and they're not on display in any museum. Critics of this work point out that Doriel seemed to write these tablets based on the occult Theosophist society and other spiritual teachings and channelings, along with a few ideas thrown in found within H.P. Lovecraft stories. And those connections do seem to be valid. Yet, even if the tablets themselves are not truly authentic, it would seem as though they are predominantly based upon a number of wisdom teachings. Doriel also provided a rich account of Atlantean culture, which could have been channeled, but of course, it's unclear if any of it is grounded in truth. For myself, I found a great deal of inspiration and wisdom by reading these passages, and they can be excellent tools for exploring the inner mysteries and contemplating the universe. Spirit Mysteries recently published a new edition of the Emerald Tablets, made to be easily legible to the modern reader, for the original publication is like, "Hark now and hear ye, and thou thine own inner flame shall be lit." It can be a bit hard to follow, so you'll find links in the comments to go and get a free download today. The Emerald Tablets describe a number of different things, from wisdom teachings to ancient history. In a nutshell, Thoth describes the beauty and majesty of Atlantis, a bright and vibrant home for the people who lived there. He goes on to describe the degeneration of the hearts of the Atlanteans, which led to their downfall and the Great Cataclysm. He said that Atlantis fell because there were those who were too proud of their knowledge and dared to enter the halls of Amenti in order to get greater knowledge, kind of a lust for power moment that created the cataclysm. This could be referring to the Martians building the synthetic Merkaba with forbidden powers. He also said that the few who survived did so by using a spaceship which today is buried beneath the Sphinx. This is a concept we explored much more thoroughly in the original Human History movie. Throughout the Emerald Tablets, he also describes a great deal of wisdom which we can use to evolve our consciousness. We highly recommend you go and read these passages for yourself if you haven't. For now though, Let's stay on the subject of history because we have one more account of this pre-flood period of time to look at.